Joined now by Commissioner of the Southeastern Conference, Greg Sankey. I think he's already got his jog in for the morning. And right off the top, I want to apologize for creating all of this drama in your conference by asking how things looked in the wake of Halloween last week. I thought, hey, things seem like they're going pretty good, and then like it can always happen, you had some positives emerge this week. Do you attribute that to Halloween-related concerns? Have you been able to figure out exactly why suddenly there were a few positives that hadn't been showing up so far?
I appreciate you owning that reality.
Yes.
So we'll get that one right out of the way. I don't think you can just boil it down when you have a set of different teams involved to one particular event. Certainly, in college communities, on college campuses around Halloween, there are activities that might result in some positive testing, but there's likely several factors. The biggest issue from a number standpoint, though, is the contact tracing outcomes, where a very few number of tests, and I think that has to be communicated. It's not an outbreak. We saw that on one of our teams in October. This is a different reality. There are positive tests, but then there's contact tracing, which requires people to be, on the sideline, and that makes it a real situation. You can't just overcome that, I think, is probably the way to describe the circumstance.
Yeah, so I want to dive into that a little bit. Jimbo Fisher came out and said that Texas A&M had 2 positives. There have been reports that Missouri had 1 positive. The Missouri-Georgia game and the Tennessee-Texas A&M game both postponed as a result. That would suggest that contact tracing, at least in those 2 situations, is actually what's at play here, not positive tests. And we talked about this to start the show, so for people out there who are just waking up, is the contact tracing protocol that is currently being applied the right one, or is it leading to situations where a 1 or 2 positive tests can have way more of an impact than maybe they should in the larger health context?
There are a few elements. If you go right to the end of that statement, there is a significant ripple effect that's tied to contact tracing, or one. If in certain circumstances 1 or 2 positive tests have a much greater ripple effect. That's not universal, and in fact, what has happened around contact tracing is a reminder of the constant need to adjust. When I go to work, I wear a tracking device, and I know if I'm within 6 feet of someone, flashes red. We've supplied those to campuses. The use of those devices as a reminder helps avoid issues. Fundamentally, though, there's more than just COVID happening around us. You go back to the summertime, a decision was made to allow young people to opt out if they weren't comfortable competing. Well, you have roster reduction from scholarship players. You get into the season, and you have injuries that may happen. You may have suspensions on a team that are the kind that would be there in any year. So you've got this attrition, and then you add to it COVID-related issues, and that creates the problem. So I think we have to understand there's a lot happening within a season. And in this season, we've introduced COVID where, all of that attrition, opt-outs, transfers may have occurred in previous years. In fact, did. It just didn't have, COVID tests and contact tracing added on top.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. We're now into mid-November. A lot of people out there said there's no way college football could be played this fall. I know you're not happy with the games being postponed this weekend, but how would you assess how the season has gone so far to this point from the perspective of the Southeastern Conference?
Overall, with what we're dealing with, it's gone, from my perspective, very well. We started, I think we were the only conference to begin the first week of play uninterrupted. Probably some of you people can fact check me on that. We did that for 3 consecutive weeks. And then we had some disruption, but we had prepared with mid-season bye weeks that we might have to accommodate that type of disruption. That was Vanderbilt in Florida. So we made it through that. And now we're coming into this stretch of 4 weeks leading us to the end of the season with the plan that we had more opportunities to accommodate some disruption. So never inattentive to reality. It's just not an infinite amount. There's not an infinite volume of makeup dates. So now we're squeezed a little bit more. What we have to do is get back on track from a health standpoint, be hyper attentive for 4 weeks. The level of self-discipline has to re-engage and increase. And, we can go back to the success we experienced early on, but we have to adjust. We're going to have to be a little bit patient and even more focused.
Do you worry about team discipline on teams that don't have a chance to win championships now? Because that happens every year. A team comes out with a lot of expectations. September, you're like, oh, this is going to be our year. We're going to win the division. We're going to win the conference. And then as the season progresses, that reality doesn't become the case. Certainly for Alabama, Texas A&M, Florida, they really are still in the center of the SEC and the national championship race. But there are other teams that aren't. Have you had that conversation with coaches about the need to kind of reinforce discipline on teams that aren't winning as much?
Well, I use the word focus, so I think we're talking about the same thing, and I have, not with every coach. Some have called me about it, and just identifying the concern. Part of those conversations will become a focus on, well, what were you trying to achieve at the beginning of the year? Was it the national championship? Was that really reasonable? Or was it success against the toughest conference schedule you're going to ever encounter, playing 10 SEC games? Was it the development of your program from where it was last year? We have 4 new coaches going through transition. You then have to look at opportunities for future development that are presented. And so sometimes you just have to reframe the vision that may have been there. Always be careful about the vision up front, and it has to be reframed. And that's part of the focus or discipline. I do have that concern, just to respond directly to the word. And it's discipline in this environment for 4 more weeks. 5 more weeks is what we're asking teams to have an experience that we were told they wanted. In fact, our student athletes were passionate about it. Let's meet our own expectations, finish this season well, name a champion, and move forward, get through this thing, and hopefully come back to something more normal for 2021.
How do you become aware of the testing results? I'm just kind of curious on the process. Do you get them every morning? Do you get them every afternoon? And what's that process like for you? Is it via email? Are you tearing open an envelope to find out how things are going? What's the process by which a commissioner would be notified about testing?
We do 3 rounds of tests in football each week, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. And those results will come in either that evening or certainly the next morning. So I've described Friday mornings as my hold your breath moment to see, that we're able to play on Saturday. But the reality is each of those moments can create disruption. We have a staff member who receives reports directly from lab results. We have a third-party partner working with us, a company called PAE, that's a logistics company that coordinates the testing on campus, the gathering of the swabs, sending them to laboratories where they have contracts. That process is properly overseen. And then the results of those are available online. I have a staff member. So I was tested yesterday. I go through it on Wednesday. Our staff who works on game day in our building all have to be tested to enter the building. And so I'll go to him about noon today and say, hey, what's my result? And that's, that plays out hundreds and hundreds of times on that Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday cadence.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. When do you anticipate, my guess would be after you get the Thursday results and find out what games are going to be able to be played on Saturday, but when do you anticipate putting together a schedule to adjust for the games that had to be postponed this week?
Our staff has been working on that task since Monday, but you hit the issue, which is you cannot produce an alternate approach if you're going to have more disruption. You just wasted your time. So you have to go back. I think 3 or 4 Fridays ago, we announced 5 or 6 game adjustments around the Vanderbilt and Florida situation. That happened on Friday evening. Right now, I don't anticipate those adjustments for the 21st. Still could happen if we find a better way, because we have a full slate of games, and what we have to do now is play games. That will help us make decisions about where do you adjust games so you can determine a championship matchup or have that determined on the field in advance of the 19th. I think we're going to allow games to be played on the 19th but those games obviously can't be directly tied to the championship game. So, Clay, that prediction of exact timing is a bit in flux. We need games to be played, so you have to get through Friday testing, make sure games are played on Saturday. And then those results have meaning as teams are either still in the championship hunt or fall out. And that's the analysis taking place in the development of different models right now.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Is there then, I would think, a precedence being put upon in-division games as opposed to out-of-division games, because that would allow you to at least be even more certain who wins the SEC West and who wins the SEC East? Is that a fair assumption?
Not right now. It kind of floats out there, still focused on the reality that all of our teams can play the 10 games. So they can play their division and their cross-divisional games. And depending on how results play out, we view that the full schedule for those teams can still be used. With, again, some of those some of those games not tied to teams that will be in the championship game being able to be played on the 19th. So we're not to that slimming point yet, if you will.
When you look at how many games have to be played, right? I mean, this has been a question from the get-go, and obviously the hope was play all 10 conference games. Certainly in the Big Ten, I'm sure you saw Maryland-Ohio State has been canceled. So at most, Ohio State would play 7 conference games and then potentially a conference championship game on top of that. Is there to you any number that you need to be able to get to? Usually you would play 8 conference games. This year you're playing 10. Is there a number you need to be able to get to feel like you can crown a champion in a legitimate fashion?
We have a tiebreaker element that's been adapted to actually provide flexibility based on circumstances. And Clay, it's like 4 pages, and I read it several weeks in a row and didn't read it this week. So you'll forgive me for not. We haven't set a threshold. So I've read others have said you have to play 6. Well, we're going to be there as a league. In fact, we'll have teams move into the 7 range this weekend. And I think we can move on. It's kind of a decision of within the average number of games completed. So if if our average number ends up being 10, then you have to play at least 9. And so there's a little bit of flux that's allowed, again, based on circumstances. But we still want to see 10 games played. Well, I thought my clever James Bond reference, "shaken but not deterred," was a reference to you take a body blow and then you come back and you reconfigure. That's meant to say, oh, sure, you react to this with not maybe the smile on your face, but with a recognition that we're still going to focus on finishing a season that we had planned.
Do you prefer shaken and stirred drinks as well, maybe more so this year than ever?
I've never entertained that particular range of the alcoholic beverage spectrum. Guinness is about the limit.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. College football playoff. A lot of people asking already. You've got your SEC championship game set on December 19th. The College Football Playoff Selection Committee, in theory, would announce the 4 playoff teams on December 20th. And I know you've addressed this a little bit, but it's the question I'm getting the most by far from fans. How set in stone in your mind are those conference title games on December 19th and the selection of the college football playoff teams on December 20th?
The 19th as a championship date remains my focus, because when you get later, in fact, the 19th is even a little bit more complex than before. The NFL plays on Saturday. There's a lot more going on.
Right.
Like the NBA is scheduled to start the 22nd. The ability to move teams, move games is not unlimited. It's not easy. Yesterday in a conference call with the media, artificial dates, artificial construct reviews. Now, these are just the dates we picked. Could, if needed, some adjustment be made? Probably, but it's not easy. It's not easy at all. So don't underestimate the weight. Someone else asked, so I'll jump into this one. Why don't you just go ahead and expand the playoff? As we know, playing more games makes it less likely you'll play all games. That's part of why we slimmed our season. And so the notion of expanding and moving teams around actually reduces the likelihood of successfully completing a playoff. And there was a time where I thought, hey, maybe we do this on a temporary basis, but I'm convinced that having a 14 playoff, I think the timing can still work. It needs to adjust. We all have to be open to that flexibility. But for me, I'm focused on crowning a champion on December 19th, and if we have to adjust, we will. But I can tell you it's surely be nice to have, the December 20th for some level of Christmas shopping in my world.
Well, also because if you move the title game to December 26th, for instance, you would end up in a situation where you're holding those guys through Christmas, right? I mean, which is,
right.
For the two championship teams, a little bit different than maybe holding through Thanksgiving, which is typical in the case of a college football season. And how would that process take place? Does everybody have to agree? I mean, is that a joint vote? I mean, how does that process? You probably don't even know, because I can't imagine you've ever even had to confront a situation like that.
Right, and I would just project what we do together collectively as conferences. I think there would be a lot. We also have bowl games for us that would start December 26th, and some could say, well, those aren't that important. But you know what? On our football student athlete calls during the summer, will we be able to play in bowl games? Was the question. My answer was yes. Well, how many? I said, well, I want our full range. And so our student athletes' expectation as it began was to have an opportunity, and that would be the only intra-conference play of this football season at a high level. So there are a lot of factors. Television's a piece of that puzzle from anyone's perspective. Again, you're in a season where you're probably more the expert than I, but the NFL moves games into Saturday windows after the traditional college football dates enter. They're going to begin their playoffs in January. You've got a presidential inauguration, January 20th. I don't know what changes after. So I think we've got to be focused on the effort to complete the season, and I think the way it's set up allows us to use the current schedule. Again, flexibility is a word that has to be on our mind, but let's focus on playing it forward as we've planned and then adjusted at present.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. You made a comment that I thought was interesting. People say, oh, well, people on Twitter are saying X or Y or Z. How much difficulty is there? I know all the time there's a lot of noise, but in particular in this year, how much just do you feel like you're constantly overwhelmed with noise? I think we talked about this before, trying to figure out the important things as opposed to just the constant cacophony. And what does Twitter and social media represent for you guys?
Yeah, I'll have a weekly report on social media activity. I have a public relations firm that prepares that, so you can look at the trends. I'm not one who dives in. I will confess to looking from time to time. We probably all do. I'm certain that someone's presented on Twitter in the last 48 hours the perfect scheduling approach, but that's not the basis. I think that's where my comment came from. As it relates to noise, I'll use the word volume. So I consider social media, the outside factors, to be noise, and I've become fairly effective at blocking those elements out. But the volume of what we're presented with is beyond what we've experienced. And I think anybody that's worked in college sports and probably professional sports would say that. When we were going through the month of September leading up to the 26th, I looked at one of my staff and I said, we're not doing anything to prepare for football season that we did last year. All of those things have to be in place. Everything we were doing leading into the season was COVID related. And just think about that. You've added a whole other level of complexity to what you try to do on a normal basis, which is hard enough. We're now 13 days away from the start of a basketball season. We have swimming taking place, soccer tournament going on, volleyball being played right now. We finished golf and tennis through the fall. There's a lot that happens in college athletics. One of the pro league commissioners I once looked at, and we were talking, I said, man, I'd love to just have one sport. That'd be an easy gig. But all of that, Clay, is kind of the volume. And I have to give credit to our staff in the SEC office for how many of them have stepped up to a whole different level of engagement. My last phone call last evening with a staff member was 10:30, followed by an 11 p.m. email to try to clear some things up heading into today. So it's not been normal. There is noise. We have to shut that out. We know it's there. It's really the volume of what's happening now is just beyond what was already a full-time job in every other year.
Greg Sankey, SEC Commissioner, good luck with those last results. Hopefully we'll get some more games in and look forward to seeing who the champ is.